I don't know where your soul is at, but we sang that awake my heart, and that's kind of where I found myself. But and for me today, it took that final song until I finally got it. It like woke up. Anybody else like sense that? It was like that song when we started singing about in the morning I'll say you are good. In the evening it's like okay. It was almost like it was an awakening for my soul, and I felt we were singing in generalities about the goodness of God, but I know there are specifics, and I don't know what was coming to your mind, but as I was singing, that's the first time I think we've sang that song, just all these specific things, people, faces, experiences, even over the course of the last week coming to mind. So I pray that as we continue on today, that your soul would connect with whatever it needs to connect with today. God is good, amen? All right, thank you, Rainier, and the Cruises for leading us in worship today. I'm gonna switch to a little keynote thing here. Oh, there we go. And I got a few things I'm supposed to talk about. And do you notice there's a whole bunch of paper on your chairs when you came in? We spared no expense or tree with the amount of paper that we put. But there are some really important things that you're going to want to pay attention to, and you're going to want to get clued in on. And the first is, goodness, it's like Christmas. I mean, I saw Christmas lights in our neighborhood last night. I don't know who's doing that this early. Some of you are those people. Anybody else seen them already in your neighborhood? I guarantee someone's got a tree already, fully decorated in your home, in your living room. Well, Christmas is upon us, and there's 2 flyers on your chair that's talking all about stuff that's going to be going on. And this really, for us as a church, starts next Friday. Next Friday, if you've never been in downtown Glendora, on the 2nd or 3rd Friday, I don't know what it is, of November, they didn't do this last year. You can expect, I'm not kidding, like tens of thousands of people will converge on downtown Glendora for the Glendora Holiday Stroll. And as you know, we have our office in downtown Glendora, so traditionally we've just used it as an opportunity to bless people. I think our youth group has glow bracelets. They're going to be handing out glowing stuff for kids there, and so if you want to jump in, if you just can't wait to get the holiday season started and you want to show up at the ministry center probably a little before 6 o'clock in downtown Glendora, we're going to be hitting the streets with baskets of glowing stuff, and it goes quickly. I mean, people love their glowing things, and there's information about the church attached to the glowing bracelets as well, and so it's just a way to reach out to our community this time of year. There's other stuff there. In just a couple of weeks, we've got, I think I'll put this slide up there, the Women's Christmas Brunch. Yeah, it's happening. Donna's here, who's kind of coordinated a lot of that, and you can see her if you want any information. It's happening in this room at 10 a.m. That's on December 4th. There's a QR code there and on the wall, and downstairs you can scan with your phone, get registered. I think it's $10. And if that's an issue, just come and we'll scholarship you in. And so that's going on. Also, I'm going to jump ahead to this. Abigail talked about this. Some of you know fans of the hit show The Chosen. Well, they've come out with a special Christmas episode in theaters. And originally they were going to do this for 2 nights, the first 2 nights of December. But nationwide, they sold out of every theater with hours. So now they've extended this for a couple of weeks, and we originally bought a block. I'm like, we got to do this. And so at AMC Glendora, I just went on in line and quickly bought a block of 30 seats. And Abigail talked about that last week. And you guys bought all 30 really quickly. So those 30 are gone. So I went on again and got 10 more, and 6 of those are gone. So what I'm trying to say is we've got 4 seats left on December 5th. And I think we may be able to get more. Right now we have it's just Vineyard in the theater, as far as I know, on that particular thing. We have got most of the theater already. And so there's a QR code there as well. It's on our website, and you can get signed up for that and let us know you want to come to the movies with Vineyard. It'll just be at AMC Glendora on December 5th at 4:15 p.m. We chose a matinee for you parents who have school days the next day. That'll be good there. And I think if those 4 go now, we can probably get more. And that's going to be a Christmas episode. And there's musical artists involved. There'll be music. There'll be show, movie. It's all one big thing. And that's happening on December 5th. We're also doing a block party. Some of you came to our trunk or treat. And that was huge. We had over, 200 or 300 guests that showed up for our trunk or treat a couple weeks ago in the parking lot here. So we thought, we got to do a holiday block party. So we're just going to throw a holiday block party on a Friday night in December with hopefully fire pits. Seth even is convinced he can get real snow or snow-making capabilities in the parking lot, and Christmas lights and hot chocolate and games for kids. We just want to throw a block party for the neighborhood, a holiday block party, and that's going to be coming up as well. There's going to be a children's program on December 19th, a short thing that they're talking to the kids about, and Tamara and Megan and the whole crew have got a lot of fun vision about that, and on and on and on it goes. I also want to talk about this, Shepherd's Pantry. Some of you are connected with Shepherd's Pantry. Literally, if we all got out of our seats right now, we could walk there in about a minute and a half. It's like down Arrow Highway, half a block, I think. And some of us volunteer there during the week to hand out food to people who are in need. And so we're partnering this holiday season with our neighbor, Shepherd's Pantry. They have told us there is a crisis right now in San Gabriel Valley when it comes to a shortage of food. They are simply running out of food to pass out to people. And so there are green buckets at the bottom of the stairs. There will be more next Sunday. We're doing all the things are on there. You can read for yourself. All of those products are needed. And I believe we have a short video from Shepherd's Pantry that we're going to run right now. We'll see if this works. Seth, you may have to help me out. Do I need to click again?
When the pandemic came, we decided quickly to scale back all the relationship building, all the extra services that we provide, but to focus on food. People need food.
These are God's people, and we're taking care of them. We're obeying His commands to feed my sheep.
I'm grateful for organizations like Shepherd's Pantry who bring volunteers together to be able to serve, those in need.
I'm a single mom, and whatever I receive here, it really helps my family.
It's given me a very, very good help for my family.
I think our clients need to know that they're loved when they come to Shepherd's Pantry.
That's the gist of what we want to do here, is just get people out of the rut that they're in.
We're here, we have a group of people that come, we care, we want to reach out and help people as best we can.
They're very helpful, they're very nice people.
It's so important, we reach out to them on a personal level.
Truly the support they give me for my family. With food donations, prayer, everything really.
If we didn't have an organization like Shepherd's Pantry, it raises the question on who would be doing it.
All right.
I want the volunteers to realize it's them that are making the difference. If it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be a Shepherd's Pantry.
We all just understand why we're here. We work hard. We try to help everybody that comes through the best we can. And there's no personal gain out of it outside of just being able to help somebody. And you don't know where that takes other people.
It has really showed me how to serve the Lord.
I love volunteering here because it's given me a place to be and make a small impact in my community.
I started here because of the coronavirus. I felt like I had to do something to help, and of course our church was asking for volunteers. So, you know what? I need to do this for people that are really suffering right now.
Personally, the virus has taught me not to take my life for granted and my health, and really to be cautious. Cautious for those that I care about, cautious where I am, what I do, who I talk to. It's shown me what's most important. Our mission goes beyond food. It goes to loving people, supporting people, helping them see that they are valued. Not everybody knows that, because when you're at a place in life where you can't afford food, you don't feel valued.
All right, I'm a little bit nervous to start talking. There may be something else. They may come back. Those were really pregnant pauses, weren't they? So, the first time I'd seen the video. All right, well, I think it speaks for itself, the need, and that's right around the corner. And so how can we not help our neighbors? And so that'll be going on, and you can talk to Karen Rugley, who's connected there, and there'll be green bins. They're here now, today. If you happen to bring canned food today in your car, go ahead and leave it with us. Otherwise, that's going on. Last thing I'll mention is we're still looking for help in our children's ministry. If that's on your heart to do, Megan and Alex would love to talk to you. Abigail's not here today because she's volunteering. And so our lead pastor is kind of leading the way and now volunteering, and she and I are both committed to doing that for our children's sake. And so Megan and Alex would love to talk to anybody who would love to get involved over in the brick building with our kids. That's going on as well. So if you brought an offering or a tithe, we do not pass baskets. There are boxes over there, 2 boxes, giving station, and one for our co-gather space next door that we're giving towards. And so I encourage you to continue in faithful giving in this season to all sorts of things, but to remember our church as well. And so with that, I would typically in years past be like we would ushers and all that, and it's kind of a transition piece, but there's not that any longer. So we'll dive into our teaching time this morning. Today, if you've not been here for a while, today we're going to go back to something we started, well, actually kind of started at the end of our Haggai series, and it kind of led into this, which is then going to kind of lead into Advent, which is then going to kind of lead into 2022 and beyond. And so we started talking last week, really, about this issue of authority. And there's even a really cool story behind the graphic that you see on there involving a small island off the coast of France. But I'll leave that one hanging there for another day and another story. But we were talking last week about authority. I'm going to take another swing at this issue, how we understand authority, how we interact with authority, and then ultimately how we use it. When we're talking about authority, we're really talking about power, aren't we? And I don't know about you, but power is kind of a loaded word for some people, is it not? It's like a little bit of a different kind of word than authority. Power has a little bit rougher edge. Anybody know what I'm talking about there? When you start using words like power, it's got some edges to it. And I imagine in a room this size, as varied a background and experiences from all over, all sorts and walks of life, I imagine if we sampled the room, there would be a variety of different ways we react when we hear words like authority or power. It evokes something in us, does it not? For some of us, I imagine there's almost a visceral, wholly negative internal response, isn't there? Like for many of us, there's this just almost like this innate kind of internal response that's negative because you have been, I could say it this way, you've been on the underside of power, right? You've had power used or authority used against you in negative ways. There would be those of us, if I opened up the mic, you could tell story after story of ways in your life that you've been either pushed down, forgotten, neglected, cast aside, even abused by people in authority. Whether it be a parent long ago, whether it be a teacher, a coach, a mentor, a spiritual leader, whomever it might be, a supervisor, a boss, an administrator. You've been on the underside of some of that power, and so there's this kind of internal something negative goes off. I was relaying a story to one of our daughters on the way to school a few weeks ago about this experience with power and authority that just kind of came back to me. You know that when you haven't thought about something for literally, I've been out of high school since 94, there I dated myself, and all of a sudden as I'm driving my own daughter to high school, this memory of a teacher who in a moment used his authority and power to humiliate me. And I don't know why it came back, and we were talking about this. It was a moment, and it came back, and I could feel those feelings once again. I had made an innocent mistake, and he, instead of excusing an innocent mistake or making the best of me, he embarrassed me in front of others, and he humiliated me, and he judged me, and I felt so looked down upon. And I bet some of you have that story, don't you? Maybe it's coming back even now. You're like, thank you, Jacob, for bringing that back. Or maybe you feel like, you know what? I feel like I'm at the mercy of entire structures of power. I have no voice in my family dynamic. I don't have any power there. I don't have any authority. In some way, maybe you feel because of a structure, a way things have been set up, you're just at the mercy of others with no voice, nothing to contribute. I was reading a book this week while I was away, out of state. It was called Playing God, Redeeming the Gift of Power by Andy Crouch. And in that book, he has this interesting definition of power. He writes this, that power is the ability to make something of the world. And I thought about that for a minute. I thought, yeah, for some of us, we don't feel like we have that ability in certain contexts, do we? We don't have the ability to make something. It's made for us. It's decided for us. That's been taken away from us. And so as I was thinking about that, I thought, for some of us, maybe there are forces at work in our lives that make that really, really difficult. But what I want to propose this morning is that, what if that didn't have to be the case? What if that wasn't the case? What if authority and power, if we look at original intent, was made for something very, very different? What if power and authority, when we think of those terms, did not have to be relegated to those worst-case scenarios, those high school memory kinds of stories, those unfortunate stories that some of us have endured? What if power and authority, when seen through the lens of God and how God deals with power and authority and dispenses power and authority, what if it was actually meant to be life-giving, soul-enriching, for the absolute betterment of our entire world, the liberation, as Abigail talked about last week? Because, and then I had this thought, and this is really what I want to press in today. What if the way God uses power and authority is actually good news? What if it's good news for a power-skeptical world? Let's just call it as it is. That when seen through the lenses, yes, of who God is and how God operates and how God shares and dispenses God's authority, it actually has the ability to create the kind of world, the kind of family, the kind of company, the kind of classroom, the kind of office, the kind of, you fill in the blank, that we wish it would be, that we all long for it to be. And maybe we're settling for far, far less. That would be good news, would it not? I think it would be good news for our family dynamics. I think it would be good news for the way we organize institutions, including a local church. I think it would be good news for our politics. It would be good news, I think, for everything. And so that's what we want to continue to press into. Last week, as I said already, Abigail kicked this off. She did a wonderful job kind of setting the stage, laying some groundwork. I have to go back there and start there because I want to put a slide up. She talked about 3 important things. And then all I want to do today in the time that I have is kind of take that one click further. Just build a little bit on that. We're going to keep returning to these things for the next few weeks and in through Advent. But I just want to take it one click further. The first thing that she talked about last week, and I'll put this on the screen behind me, she started with this idea, kind of a basic building block, that all authority or power comes from God. That as creator and sustainer of all reality, all that is, we cannot talk about authority. We cannot talk about power without talking and tracing it back to its ultimate source. In his letter to the Colossians, chapter 1, the Apostle Paul, in verse 15 through 17, describes Jesus. He's describing Jesus here. And he describes Jesus as, or the Son, as the image of the invisible God. Such that when we are looking at Jesus, when we read about Jesus in the Gospels, we are reading about who? God. The image of the invisible God. And then he goes on to say this, if you jump back, if you kind of go down to verse 17, he writes this: He, Jesus, is before all things, and in him all things hold together. That's where he starts. Now, I was thinking about this as I read those verses. If you are before all reality, if you exist before all things, and subsequently you also hold all of it together, then would you agree that you have a corner on authority and power? You have cornered the market on authority and power. And that thought this week got me thinking about neutron stars. Which is, I know exactly what you knew. You knew I was going there. You're like, I bet he's going to talk about neutron stars next. Yes, it's exactly where it went with me. Some of you astronomers, you're going to love this. I'm not sure if you ever took a class in astronomy. I think I might even have a picture of one here. Oh, there we go. Well, I don't know if that's actually one, an artist's rendition of what a neutron star may or may not look like. But if you ever took a class in astronomy, these things are absolutely fascinating, which cause my mind to go a million different directions, which are obviously for future sermons. But these things are absolutely crazy, because a neutron star, in case you forgot, a neutron star is what's left over after what's called a supernova. And a supernova is when a star what? Explodes. And it's kind of the remains of a supernova, that when the core of a star collapses, it can form these super dense stars or particles, whatever you want to call them, things. It can cause these things that are truly some of the most astronomers say, these are some of the most mind-bending, bizarre objects in the universe. How they work and how they operate. Some of you are like, how so? And what does this have to do with a sermon on authority and power? Well, just go with me here for like 30 more seconds, or maybe a minute and a half, okay? We're going to stay with neutron stars for one more minute. A typical neutron star, seen behind me, has a mass of roughly 1.4 times the sun. Now, I know that means nothing for us. You're like, well, how much mass is that? A lot. You're like, equivalent to, that would be like the mass of 333,000 Earths is a neutron star. But here's the mind-bending part. Astronomers say that much mass in a neutron star is squeezed into a space that's roughly 10 miles in circumference, which would be about from here to the border of Claremont. My mind is already hurting. 300, that's like squeezing, 330,000 Earths into a space the size from here to Claremont. And we think we're in control of our lives and we can figure things out. I mean, this has got my mind going all sorts of degrees. Point being, neutron stars are very, very, very dense. And it takes a lot of what? A lot of force or a lot of power to hold all that together, doesn't it? I mean, this is like crazy kind of stuff. If we were somehow able to take a tablespoon and scoop a neutron star and get that much of its mass, like that much neutron star, they say it would weigh the equivalent of 1 billion tons. That's 2 trillion pounds in a tablespoon. Point being, if you're before all things, including neutron stars, and you're holding all things together, including neutron stars, you've got a corner on power and authority, don't you? And we should probably pay attention. And then I'll take this a step further. If God is holding all that together, what does that mean for your family and my life and your place of work? If he can hold all of that together. This has got mind-bending kind of ramifications, doesn't it? Let's just sit with that for a minute. Sit in that reality for just a moment. All authority comes from God, and he's holding it all together, including me. And a tablespoon of neutron star. Crazy. Second thing Abigail said last week is that God's authority is ultimately for liberation, not domination. That authority, when it's connected to its purest, I would say most divinely intended end, will never be used for coercion or manipulation or abuse or selfish gain. It will always be used for freedom and flourishing. Always. And that's a vastly different way from how some of us view authority, isn't it? how some of us view power. It means that authority, the way God intended it, is always to be used to make the world a little bit more whole. And so if that's not happening in your office, and if that's not happening in your family, and if that's not happening in your company, and if that's not happening in a relationship with your cousin, or whatever that might be, then it's not godly power and authority at work. And we got to call it for what it is. Third thing she shared last week is that God shares, dispenses, and releases his authority through us. The one who's holding together the neutron star, the power, the authority that holds all of that together, actually wants to share and release some of his power through us. And this is where we landed last week, with this idea that authority as God intended it, and I think this is an important point, it's not a zero-sum game, is it? It's not. The world sees authority that way. If I give it up, I'll have less. There will be less. I won't have. If I give, if I share, I won't. It's this pull and tug. And if I submit here, then I won't have that. And it's that with God, it's not a zero-sum game. If God actually shares his authority with us and then tells us then to share our power and our authority with others, there's not less to go around. I will make the point today. Actually, there's more. It's quite the opposite. There's actually more to go around, and we'll get to that in a moment. And so let me just take this one click further today. Dive a little bit deeper, and I want to explore two thoughts. Number one, how? How are we given God's power and God's authority? How does that even work? I want to start there, and then I want to go one other question. Why? Why? For what? For what purpose? 2 weeks ago, when we wrapped up our series in Haggai, this is the last verse from the book of Haggai. Very obscure little line where God says the following in yellow to a rather obscure, might I call him a powerless regional governor of a little place called Judah, which is under the thumb of an empire called Persia. And God says this, I will take you, my servant Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord. I will make you like my signet ring, for I have chosen you. We talked about how the idea of the signet ring has been used throughout history as a symbol, really, of declaring what? Giving someone in authority, their ability to give what? Their power away, their authority away. We talked about Joseph when Pharaoh gave him the ring. The whole kingdom is yours. We talked about Mordecai when he's given the ring. The same kind of thing in the Persian Empire. And God says to this powerless regional, I'm giving you. The one who's holding together the neutron star says, I'm giving you my signet ring. You are going to be like that. I'm going to give you my authority. And God said he was going to do that through this guy, Zerubbabel. And then we traced what God did through Zerubbabel. And it eventually, of course, always, it lands on Jesus, doesn't it? In Matthew 1. It lands on Jesus, the one who Paul says is before all things, the one who is the image of the invisible God and is holding it all together. And so I just want to begin at the beginning, and then I want to follow the story real quickly back to Jesus and see where we fit in. Where do we fit in this story as those imbued, I love that word, with God's power and God's authority? Let me start with this thought. I'll put it on the screen. And really, this comes to us from the very beginning of the Scriptures. This is out of Genesis. This is my thought, but it's out of Genesis 1 and 2, and it's this. God gives a measure of his authority to those who bear God's image by virtue of being human. All right, let's unpack that a minute. Let's go back to Genesis 1, which is absolutely foundational to our understanding of both who we are and what we are to do with who we are. There we find in Genesis 1 the triune God, Father, Son, and Spirit. We find the triune God participating in, I think, what can only be described as an act of divine collaboration. There's like this collaboration, this sharing, as it were, going on in Genesis 1. And in this act of, I guess you could describe it as creative love. There is this act where God unleashes shared creative power into the world and does what? Makes humans. Genesis 1:26, God says, let us, there's that shared, communal, collaborative, triune kind of language. You're like, let us. Who's us, God? Let us make what? Mankind, humankind, in our image, in our likeness. And so from the very first chapter, Genesis 1, we are told something absolutely foundational as to what it means to be a human being. And we're told that to be a human is to bear the what? The image, the likeness of this divine community, this Trinity, to bear that image. Now, some of you have heard that said so many times, you've read that so many times that it is so unfamiliar to you. Because it's become so familiar, it's unfamiliar. The gravity, the weight of that is somehow, sometimes lost. And so let me try to talk about the reality of Genesis 1:26 from a slightly different kind of historical angle. And maybe it will open up something new for you today. And maybe it will help you see who you're looking at when you look in the mirror in a slightly different way. The idea that human beings bear the image of the divine, of God. When that was written, when Genesis 1:26 was written, you have to understand that was a mind-blowing, groundbreaking thought in human consciousness. Are we tracking? This is brand new stuff here. We're reading something that is groundbreaking in human historical consciousness at the time in which it was written. Because in the ancient Near East, where these stories come out of, right, that phrase, that title, the image of God, was reserved for really two realities. And that was idols and kings. Think about it. Who bears the image of the God? Well, first you have the idol, right? You go to a temple. You typically find an idol where? Inside of a temple in the ancient Near East. You go into the temple and there you find a what? A physical representation, an image of whatever God it was in that temple, correct? So you go to the temple, you see an object, you see an idol, and that functioned as a reflection, or you could say an embodiment of whatever God that was. You could say it this way. It wasn't God. The idol wasn't the God, was it? But it was a what? An image of the God. Made in the God's what? Likeness. And so as such, that idol operated as a representation of that particular God's presence and what? Power. Presence and power. Keep that in your mind. Second thing I said, kings. In the ancient Near East, the assumption was the kings were a gift of the king, the Pharaoh, was a gift of the what? The gods. The gods provided a human being, someone, an image in human form that was chosen, sent by the gods to do what? Rule and reign on their behalf, correct? And they were called, so thus they were the image of the gods. And then you have Genesis 1 come along. And you get an entirely different story, don't you? We sometimes call this a counter-narrative. You get a story that comes along saying that it's not actually idols and kings that bear the image of the divine. It's actually what? Every human being that exists. All humanity is made in the image of God. That's why I said this is groundbreaking stuff. And one of the first things this community is told to do, if you continue to read through the Bible, is not to make what? Idols. Why are they told not to make idols? Because this God has images all over the planet that are a representation of his presence and power. That are there to do what? Rule and reign. You are made in the image of God. And as such, the assumption is that by virtue of being human, you and I are here to rule and to reign as representatives of the what? Presence and power of God. Is this clicking? Is this starting to give you a different way to see who you are and what it means to bear the image of God? That this authority, what power is given to you and to I? And so from the very beginning, we see God is sharing God's authority and God's power with us. It's not a zero-sum game. God is giving up. Some of you are like, well, so what is God giving up? Nothing. It's His ring. He just gives it up to us to bear. For a time, for however many years we're given, we bear the ring. We bear the authority. And God, this is what I said, God is actually making room for there to be more creative power released into our world. This is not less, this is more. More potential. Because, just look around this room. Look at all the creative power that just sits in this room alone. Endless capabilities, endless potential, talents, gifts that you and I have been given by God because you're simply made in the image of God to be used for the liberation and the flourishing of this beautiful thing that God has given us, this gift that God has given us. And that's actually where the story goes next. Because immediately after, look at it in yellow, immediately after what I would call an ontological statement about the nature of what it means to be human, the story goes there with a statement about purpose. In essence, why? So we're made in God's image. Why? For what purpose? So that they may what? Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over the livestock and all the wild animals and all the creatures that move along the ground. And then you read 2 verses later. In verse 28, God blessed them, the first humans, and said, what? Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish. God discussed this thing about ruling over fish twice in 3 verses. Make sure you rule over them fish. Birds of the sky, every living creature that moves along the ground. And then you go a chapter later in Genesis 2, and we read that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to do what? Work. Tend to it. Take care of it. Over and over you get this language of ruling, reigning, being fruitful, taking it somewhere, increasing the beauty and the creative power, tending to the garden. It begins to sound like what? Using the power and authority that we've been given to make something beautiful, to take it somewhere. The image bearers are commanded, as such, to develop whatever you've been given to make the world more whole. Collaborate with God. Collaborate with each other in this ongoing, beautiful work of creation that began a long time ago. And really, the possibilities are truly endless. Like I said, I look around the room here, and some of you have the creative power to heal. Your words heal. Your hands heal. Some of you, quite literally. You can fix things and heal people. Like, why? You ever thought about why am I a healer? I've got some of you, man, you teach. You create. When you teach, you create, don't you? It's not just like, I just pass on information. No, you create. You create an environment. You create an experience when you teach. You're creating. Some of you, man, you cook, don't you? You bake. What are you doing? Are you not creating? Some of you do art. This guy over here writes music. What's he doing? He's creating. Creating what? Beauty. Worship. He's just co-creating with God. Some of you draw. You compose. It's just endless. I'm just throwing some things out here looking around the room. You fix things. What are you doing? I'm just good at that. Why? I'm always asked that, well, why are you good at that? Where did that come from? Why is that in you? It's like we each have a what? We each have a garden to tend to, don't we? It's like God has said, I'm giving you a part of the garden. The garden's here. You got a part to tend to. What's your part? What are you going to tend to? A little part of the world where we're called to use this God-given power. That's why I said you can redeem power, can't you? You just got to think about it a different way. Use this God-given power to create something beautiful. And here, let me take this one step further. When you get a bunch of people living in the same community who understand this, and who understand, when we get to Jesus here in a second, who understand that the power released through the Holy Spirit and through Jesus, when you get a bunch of people together in the same room, living in community, who understand that, a bunch of people who collaborate together in acts of divine collaboration to create something beautiful in the world, you know what I would call that? A church. Isn't that a church? It's a bunch of people who understand who they are and why they're here, and who are using what's been given to them to create something beautiful, which some days looks like serving 300 hot dogs at a trunk or treat in the parking lot. Some days it looks like that. I mean, the possibilities, as I say, are absolutely endless. And so maybe you and I, maybe we're guilty of having too low a view of ourselves and what we've been given and why we're here. And I would argue it's tied to an unhealthy understanding of authority and power. I would take it a step further, an unbiblical understanding of authority and power. We are created in the image of God. Psalm 8 says, crowned with glory and honor. Just a little lower than the angels. Remember that one? To do what? To tend, to release his power and presence in the world as we create. Which brings us back to Jesus. Because I said I was going to start at the beginning in Genesis and trace this back to Jesus. That brings us right back to the one Paul described, not as created in the image of God, but as the what? The image of the invisible God. God binds himself in the gospel. What's Christmas about? Coming up in a few weeks. God binding himself to humanity through Jesus to show humanity what true ruling and reigning looks like. You want to see God's rule and reign? You look at Jesus, don't you? That's it right there. Humanity the way God intended it to be. And what does Jesus spend his life doing and demonstrating and talking about? The what? He goes around demonstrating and talking all about this idea of the kingdom of God. And every kingdom has a what? A king. It's all about ruling and reigning the way God intended it. He shows us that. He shows it. He himself takes on the title as what? King of Kings, Lord of Lords. But it was a kingdom built on a very different foundation, a throne built on a very different foundation. Psalm 89 took us there a few weeks ago. It's a foundation built on two things, righteousness and justice. And it leads with two things, love and faithfulness. And Jesus models that for us. And he bids his followers to come and follow and give whatever image-bearing years they have to that pursuit. Think of it, you can think of it as a new way of being human, but I would actually argue it's the oldest way of being human possible. It's tied right back to Genesis 1. And Jesus calls his followers away from all the destructive, abusive ways authority and power have been used down throughout the centuries, because we could list off millions of ways and tell millions of stories. And he calls us back to the beautiful, life-giving, creative purposes that God always intended. He tells us at the end of the gospel, Matthew 28, all authority has been given to me, so go and do what? He commissions his followers to go and continue the work of creation that God has begun. Next week we're going to talk more about we're going to talk about what does it look like to exercise that kind of authority. And I think this runs us right into Advent. And we'll sit there for 4 weeks too. So a couple of reflection questions. We've been ending this way. I hope it's helpful. Rainier, you can come on up. Rainier's going to just kind of recenter us. So for those of us who are like, man, that voice drones on and on forever. La 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 la, wah 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 wah. Just recenter our brains. Wake them up again. All right. Another sound. Recenter our brain. Is this helpful? I hope this is helpful. A year following an election, where there's a little bit of where power and authority, and you talk about divide in a country. Let's redeem it. Let's talk about it in a Jesus kind of way. Power and authority is even as, we're like 1 year out from a craziest seasons in our country. And as we deal with issues of power and authority and government and masks and all these things, it's like, man, let's focus. Let's keep our eyes where they should be. Let's pass those out. A couple of questions we'll reflect on. What do you sense you've been called to tend to? Do you have a sense you are here to cultivate something? Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's a relationship right now. And this might not be for all time. You might be in a season right now. I am tending to my oldest child. That could be where you're at. That's my calling. I am to cultivate this office, my classroom, my place of whatever it might be, a company. What else did I put on there? An organization, a group. I think this is on your paper. We should probably a church. I need to tend to some things. We got things we need to tend to as a church right now. We need to cultivate. And I am not worried, neither is anybody on our leadership team, that we do not have the creative potential in this room. That is the least of our concerns. The greatest concern is, are we actually using it? It's there. Are we tapping into it? Do you have a sense? What have you been called to tend to cultivate? And then secondly, how are you using, or if you're not using, how could you use the authority and the power that has been given to you by virtue of being human? How could you use that as an image bearer for the flourishing of whatever you're called to tend to? Is there a more redemptive way you could use your influence? You could use I have influence there. I have a voice. They're listening to me now. I think of that every day as I look at 19 sets of eyes that sit there and stare at me. 19 sets of eyes that sit and wait for me to tell them for 45 minutes something about God. You want to talk about using power and authority in redemptive ways? Some of you have that. You have influence. How are you using it? How could you use it? Maybe for some of us, it's just the person sitting across the table. I need to tend to that relationship. Or think of it this way. What's your part of the garden that you know you're supposed to create? You're like, I'm here to write music. I'm a healer. I'm a networker. Ringer's going to play. Give you a moment to reflect. Jot some stuff down. This isn't homework, but if it's helpful, jot some thoughts down. Maybe it'll lead you this week. And then we'll see what the Spirit wants to do.